Hello. This week in the UK, it's National Mental Health Awareness Week, and that runs all the way through until this Sunday, the 16th of May. So in episode 158 of the podcast, we'll be talking to my guest Katie Demain from iOpener Institute about how to normalise conversations about mental health. Welcome to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the unified voice of the AICPA and CIMA. From the London office of the association, I'm Kyle Hannon. And every week on the podcast, we share insights from inside the accounting and finance profession that help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever part of the profession you're in. So while all of this month is the National Mental Health Awareness Month in the US, the National Mental Health Awareness here in the UK is just a week long, and that ends this 16th of May. And because we are recording this here in the UK, we're going to be concentrating on the National Mental Health Awareness Week theme, which we'll be talking more about soon. Of course, links to find out more about both the US National Mental Health Awareness Month and the United Kingdom's National Mental Health Awareness Week. You'll find links in our show notes. This week's episode is all about how to bend but not break, how to live, how to work, and how to continue learning through disruption. And we're talking to a returning podcast guest. She is Katie Demain. She's an executive coach, a designer of leadership development programs. She's a speaker, a writer, and an expert in psychometrics. Katie is Director of Leadership Development Programs and a global partner at iOpener Institute. She works with clients all around this world of ours, and she leads teams to develop on the programs she designs. She principally works in English, but she also works in French and in Spanish too. To make my life easier, we are sticking with English. Hello, Katie. Which part of the country are you joining us from today? You are in England, or you're somewhere warmer?
I am, yes. Hi. I'm in Northumberland in the northeast of England, near the town of Hexham, which is sort of Hadrian's Wall area.
The weather today where we are is looking like it's going to be 10 days of non-stop rain, so I suppose that keeps things green. That is a constant. I think no matter where in the country you are, at least the 10 days weather-wise looks pretty consistent. But that's one of the few consistent things we're looking at, because the rest of the world, because of the pandemic, because of lockdowns, things are very, very much not consistent. Every day brings new interruptions, new and unexpected developments. And of course, it takes a toll on us in all sorts of ways. And that's why this week we are talking about mental health. But before we do, plug us into your world for a minute. You've told us about being based up in the north, but what did I leave out when I introduced you?
That's right. My main role is at iOpener Institute, designing leadership programs and delivering them. But also I volunteer at Action for Happiness, actionforhappiness.org, which is a worldwide global movement to help people find more happiness for themselves and others in society.
And that's a particular interest of mine as well, because many years ago when I was living and working in the city of Bristol, I was instrumental in joining the action group which set up a happiness project in Bristol, one of the first cities in Europe to do that. So that's something which I'm always interested to hear is still very much on people's plates. Now, your role involves designing leadership programs, and you do that via iOpener Institute. What does iOpener Institute actually do, and how does that work connect with the accounting and finance profession?
Well, its purpose is making leadership, learning, and life better. And we work with a lot of business schools, in fact, 5 of the top business schools around the world, and organisations throughout the world, doing just that, making leadership, learning and life better. And we have worked previously with AICPA and CIMA. I've recorded several sessions for them, including building personal resilience, some of your listeners may have seen. And really this purpose of making leadership, learning and life better is because we realise, especially now that we've lived through 2020 and into 2021, that you can't separate organisational work and life. You can't separate leadership and life. And we're forever learning in order to be able to adjust and cope and thrive, if we can, through all of these changes.
This episode is called Bending, Not Breaking: How to Live, Learn and Work Through Disruption. But a lot has changed since you last joined us on the podcast for Mental Health Awareness Week 2019. So almost exactly 2 years ago. And since 2019, we've had 2020, haven't we, as you've just said. So now in 2021, what does your research tell us about the way that the profession has been coping with this unprecedented level of disruption?
We have been doing monthly surveys at iOpener with people through social media around the world. And one of the most stark findings and insights that we gleaned is that 1 in 5 people in the workplace are experiencing and have been experiencing overwhelm during the pandemic. That's even amongst people who would normally rate their resilience as very high. So 65% of the population will generally say, I'm a really resilient person. But even amongst them, 19% of that group have even been saying that they've been experiencing overwhelm, just too much on their plate. And sometimes, we can think of stress as we have a container for the stress, each of us. And sometimes we're putting more and more stuff in that container, whether that's work deadlines or illness or family problems or relationship issues. And suddenly your stress container starts to overflow. And this is what they're saying. That overwhelm means that their stress container is feeling like it's overflowing with demands from too many sides. Also, about 60% of people say that the pandemic has affected their mental health. So this week, I think Mental Health Awareness Week is more than ever such a topical and important subject for us to be talking about.
I've got another stats question for you. I recall recently that research indicated that people would always have said that, well, you've got to work in the office because working from home will mean that you'll be much less productive. You'll be distracted. There's no way you'll keep up the level of work and focus if you're at home compared to at the office. Turns out that research that I was reading about indicated that expectation didn't actually turn out to be borne out by the research. So what do your stats tell you about how things have compared pre-lockdown to where we are now?
Yeah. So through a survey that we call the IPPQ, which is free of charge to individuals, we know, and we've been tracking this for about 12 years, we know that people's time on task, which means basically that the percentage of their day that they're doing what they're paid to do. Typically, it was about 60%, perhaps 61%, up till 2019. And then, as we tracked this during 2020, it actually increased. So really, there's been a shift in thinking as this has become more apparent to employers that, in fact, when people are working from home, in fact, we know that the majority of people are actually as on task as they were before, if not more on task. And it's actually gone up to 72% on task during 2020. So I think that has completely shifted employers' mindset around people's ability to work from home. And I would say that there's a double-edged sword there. First of all, people are obviously relishing in the autonomy and that freedom that working from home gives them. But at the same time, one of the detractors from their ability to be on task, it has been pandemic pressures, concerns about job security, having to manage family life. But overall, time on task increased.
And that brings us, I think, back to the main reason we're talking about this topic this week of all weeks. And this is something that a week like this encourages us to look at. We look at research, we look at resources, we look at how well we're doing, how we can do better. Or if we're not doing so well, how do we help ourselves? How do we make sure that we bend rather than break? And of course, as with every national day or awareness campaign, they'll come with a theme. And this year is no different. So looking at the theme for UK Mental Health Awareness Week 2021. It's a single word, Katie. What is that word? What can you tell us about that theme?
Mark Rowland, who's the chief executive of the Mental Health Foundation, he tells us that, in the UK, people's prime or top coping strategy of getting through the pandemic was to have a daily walk. That was the most common. And also people noticed that green space is vital to their mental health. So he says that it was as if we were rediscovering that at our most fragile point, our fundamental human need to connect with nature was so necessary. So it's very apt this year. And people may also have found out a bit about something we call forest bathing, which is on the up in terms of popularity. It's a Japanese philosophy, really, Shinrin Yoku in Japanese, about the importance of being in nature, not just being in nature, but connecting with nature, actually.
That certainly does sound interesting, but I think I may have the wrong idea of what that actually means. So perhaps you'll set me straight in a couple of minutes. But going back to what you said about nature and people's appreciation for it. I was reading, I think just yesterday, that here in the UK, the housing market has shifted to people putting, I think, something like twice as much emphasis on looking for homes with a small private outdoor space than they were before the pandemic, before the lockdown. So that appreciation of being able to in some way connect with nature, even right where you live, is certainly something which we're seeing come to the fore. So perhaps this theme of nature for Mental Health Awareness Week is absolutely understood. So another word that they do use is there in the title, Mental Health Awareness Week. And my question then is about that word. What does being aware mean? Are there particular signs that we should all be more aware of, which could indicate that we as in ourselves, or perhaps our friends and colleagues, are actually feeling the strain? What does being aware of this kind of thing actually involve?
Yes. So I think that's a really important question. So let's say we're at work, and being at work, of course, that might mean we're on Zoom in a meeting. But we might be noticing over time that a certain colleague has, you've noticed a change in mood, demeanor, appearance. They might even be looking disheveled. You might have seen or experienced different behaviors like irritability or less interaction, or withdrawal. And you may also have noticed performance issues, like they're not dealing with their workload, they're missing deadlines, or they're making mistakes that was not normally, the way they worked before. So you may have noticed this, and you've got this concern. Well, there's only one thing to do, and that is to actually approach them and start a conversation with them about it. Obviously, in a private setting, one-to-one, not within earshot of anybody else. But if you're in an office, that might be a water cooler moment, or it may be, as simple as picking up the phone and checking in.
So does that mean that there are some things that we're now seeing that this period of disruption are actually compounding? So there may be these kind of stress factors or risk factors of mental health that were very much the case 50 years ago, 100 years ago. They will be the case in 50 or 100 years. We worry about family or finances. What are some of the features of personal well-being that you think are being compounded by this disruption at the moment? What are those things we should be aware of?
Well, the pandemic has affected different people in different ways, but one thing for sure is that it has affected everybody. So we can't assume that the way the pandemic affected us is the way it affected a colleague or a friend. And, your personal circumstances obviously make a difference to the way it's had an impact on you. But the 5 features of personal well-being, and we know this from the science of happiness, in order of importance, are first and foremost family is the most important to our personal well-being and our happiness. Then financial circumstances, work, community and friends, and 5th is health. And of course, all of those have been affected. So usually there's a compounding effect happening for people at the moment, big changes happening in a lot of those areas that affect our well-being. And sometimes, that stress container I mentioned before is suddenly overflowing, and we get to that situation where we feel we can't cope. And that comes out as a mental health difficulty.
I want to then pick you up on mental health. You've just mentioned that. I think you said health was number 5 in that list of the features of personal well-being. How do people usually deal with change under normal circumstances when it comes to mental health? And what new challenges are they facing because of the pandemic? You said that the majority of people don't really deal with change well, which I can certainly understand. Tell us more about that.
That's so true. So if we think from a personality type point of view, most personality types don't like change. It's as simple as that. We're creatures of habit. We don't like change, and we struggle to adapt. There are some personality types who are the lucky ones who almost thrive or do thrive on change. But it's not the majority of people. And I think what the pandemic has done is created change on so many different fronts that even those people who normally are copers have perhaps struggled with just the magnitude and the number of areas in which that change is happening. And people will generally respond in one of two ways. You have unproductive uncertainty. We don't like uncertainty. So we feel paralyzed. That can make us feel lacking in energy. We may feel we want to withdraw. We may even want to sleep a lot more than normally. Or we can have uncertainty capability. And this is where we have a strong sense of personal agency that we can cope and we can find a way through this. Those are signals that we can look for in people that are working around us. And we can kind of ascertain how we think they're doing. And if we think that they are struggling, it's everybody's responsibility. It's not just the boss's responsibility or HR responsibility. Everybody has a responsibility to engage that person in conversation.
Yeah, and I suppose as more and more people are talking about perhaps returning to the office, and this is obviously something which is happening at different rates in different parts of the world. Here in the UK in mid-May 2021, we are slowly coming out of lockdown. That's the ambition anyway, because of the tremendous success of our vaccination program. And there are more conversations here about returning to the office and what that's going to look like. But obviously globally, different regions, different parts of the world are moving through this at different rates, and their situations will not be the same everywhere. But ultimately, the ambition is for all of us to get back to work in some way. And you've talked about recognizing stresses when working from home. And now that people are possibly thinking of returning to the office, that definitely offers that opportunity to reconnect with our colleagues, with other people. It gives us the chance to talk to one another face to face again. And that brings us the opportunity to catch up, to empathize, perhaps to have those conversations you were talking about, to talk about the challenges we're facing, and in many cases to ask for, perhaps even to offer support. And that then offers the chance of reestablishing that human connection factor. My question then is, we know about the value of the human connection, but you were talking about the value of the connection with nature, the theme of Mental Health Awareness Week 2021. What more can you tell us about why that wider connection with nature is now coming more into play? Because if we're sitting working from home, obviously we can look out the window, perhaps see a better view than we could have from the office. So how do we keep that connection with nature going? How do we make that more a part of our lives in the future?
I think it's come about partly because there's a lot more scientific evidence coming out of different academic institutions around the world about connection with nature and its importance, but also because perhaps, in the last decades, many of us have become so disconnected from nature. In previous generations, nature was much more a part of people's lives. Really, the disruption that we want to happen as a result of the pandemic is not just these changed ways of working, but changed ways of regarding our place on this planet of Earth and how we connect with nature and how we protect the Earth. So it's very topical, I think, if we think of Greta Thunberg and climate change movement as well.
there was a very interesting quote. I think I may have seen this on a blog on your website from Brene Brown, and a TED talk from Johann Hari as well. And they give us some interesting reference points of how many hours of social contact we need, or how many close friends we find gives us kind of an optimal balance. And there's met and unmet needs. And I thought all of that was really fascinating. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, we know, and especially people who've been alone during the pandemic, who live alone, they know just how harmful loneliness is to our mental health. In fact, to our physical health as well. It's as harmful as smoking or drinking excess alcohol. But Brene Brown, she's a professor at Houston University in Texas. She talks about needing, the human being needs 6 hours of social contact a day to have thriving well-being. And of course, the pandemic has really scuppered that. But of course, Zoom, if people have access to Teams and Zoom and those kind of technologies, it's helped us immensely through the pandemic. And while we might not have had 6 hours of social contact every day, even 3 hours would greatly reduce the suffering of loneliness. But also, Brene Brown has told us that everybody needs at least 3 close friends, not including your partner. So 3 different friends who you can pick the phone up to, chat to over a garden fence, whatever it may be. Because each of those friends brings something specific and unique in terms of their strengths and what you appreciate in them, which gives you fortitude as well. And you mentioned Johann Hari. His TED talk says that a lot of the underlying reasons for depression and anxiety are because of unmet needs. And he says there are 9 causes of depression and anxiety, only 2 of which are biological. Of course, we know that when we go to our GP, we will probably come out with antidepressants and will be treated as if it's biological. But there are lots of disconnections that we can work on ourselves or in talking therapies that will help us, like a disconnection from meaning and purpose, or a disconnection from meaningful experiences shared with other people, or a disconnection from meaningful values. He talks about junk values and how far we've come from having solid core values, which would be things like integrity and honesty and trust and loyalty. And instead, we've got junk values sometimes of materialism or status, these kind of things that actually don't serve us in terms of our well-being. So I think it's helping us return to quality values. And one of those disconnections is from the natural world that we were talking about before, Kyle.
And I think I might want to pick you up on that in a minute. We'll talk a little bit more about the importance of human connection, the ways that we're helped by a better connection with the natural world itself. And I'm going to ask you to tell us more about that forest bathing you mentioned. That's coming up in a minute or two when I continue our conversation with our guest, Katie Demain. You're listening to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's recorded in London, and my name is Kyle Hannon. This is one of over 100 episodes focusing on professional insights from inside the accounting and finance profession. We focus on technologies, we focus on human intelligence, we focus on all sorts of things that can help you in your profession to go beyond disruption. We look at what is causing the issues, the challenges around us, and look at how we turn those disruptions into opportunities. You can find those episodes in our archive. Go to gobeyonddisruption.com. That is gobeyonddisruption.com. Absolutely free to listen to. And you can get episodes every week, completely free, through your music or podcast app of choice. You can find us on all sorts of podcast apps. Wherever you get your music, you should find Go Beyond Disruption podcast right there. You can search for it online. Just search for Go Beyond Disruption podcast. And if you make sure that you also look for AICPA, that will make sure you find the right podcast. Completely free every week. And right now you are listening to episode 158 of that podcast, where we're talking to Katie Demain of iOpener Institute. We're talking about nature the theme of Mental Health Awareness Week 2021, which ends this Sunday, 16th of May. And Katie's talking to us about ways we can boost resilience in the face of the disruption we're facing around us right now. How do we learn to bend, not break? How do we live, learn, and work through this period of disruption? Katie, you were talking about the importance of nature, how it can help us boost resilience and strengthen our sense of mental well-being. And I was talking about outdoor walks. And you mentioned this forest bathing thing. So am I right? Is that anything to do with wild swimming, or will it turn out that I won't actually need a towel for this forest bathing?
Well, actually, in a general sense, wild swimming could come under this heading, yes, but probably you don't need a towel. And that's, so if we think about Shinrin Yoku, which is the Japanese term for this, Shinrin translates as forest, Yoku means bath, but we can bathe in sunlight. We can bathe in green light. We can bathe in a forest. We can bathe ourselves in nature. So bathing in a very generalized way, I suppose.
As in immersion, so immersing yourself completely in nature. That's what you're talking about.
Exactly. And this is not exercise. It's not hiking. It's not jogging. It's simply being and connecting with nature. So we do this through our senses, through our sense of sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch. When we're indoors, we tend to only use two senses, our eyes and our ears. Whereas if we're outside, where we can smell flowers, we can taste the fresh air, we can look at the changing colors of the trees, listen to the birds singing, we can feel the breeze on our skin. And so when we open up our senses, we begin to connect to the natural world. And that's what forest bathing is about.
And this is backed up in a scientific way as well. I mean, it's more than just a nice thing to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can tell you 3 snippets of science behind it. So first of all, Professor Richard Taylor from the University of Oregon, he is a physicist, a psychologist, and an artist, amazing combination of specialisms. And he has studied what we call fractals. These are the never-ending patterns that are repeated on many scales and that have a deep effect on our brain, producing more alpha brain waves. These are the good brain waves that might be associated with meditation, with mindfulness, with relaxation, or that really good feeling after we've done some high impact exercise. It's that feeling afterwards of very satisfying calm. And these are produced by these fractals in nature because of the repetition of these patterns that we see. So if you think of a fern, the fern has its spine and it has leaves, and then each leaf has leaflets with the same pattern, and they go from big to small, but in the same pattern, repeated again and again. Or if you're walking through a field of wheat this summer, that repetition of wheat is repeated endlessly. So it actually has a calming effect because we're not having to do risk assessment. We're not having to scan the environment and check for what's happening around us. Like we might if we're walking down Oxford Street.
So your eye's picking up, almost without you realizing it, on this pattern that's repeated in a kind of a reassuring and non-threatening way. And that provides a sense, almost without you realizing it, just by looking at it, it calms you down and has a positive effect by producing these positive alpha brainwaves you were talking about. That's fascinating. We're sitting here making an audio podcast. So what do our ears have to do with all of this?
Right. So at the University of Brighton and Sussex, they found, I think just in 2017, they did some MRI scans on brain when we listen to natural sounds such as, a babbling brook or a bird song or the lovely sound of wind in trees. And those natural sounds have a very relaxing, calming effect on our nervous system, as well as our mental state and our mood. And they compared those to everyday modern sounds as well, which actually had the opposite and aggravated the nervous system, creating more anxiety and stress. So we know that the natural sounds have a healing effect even. And if we have been under stress, And then we listen to natural sounds. So let's say we go for a walk in the woods, we will recover 60% faster than had we not gone for that walk in nature. And even 15 minutes has been shown to have beneficial consequences on our well-being. So I suppose what some people may be asking is, hey, I don't live in the countryside. I don't have access to the bluebell woods by the river. Well, that's a fair comment. And we can get a similar effect from watching a program or a documentary, a wildlife documentary, it's found. We can get similar effects of looking at nature if we're studying a plant on our desk, or if we're sitting on our balcony in the city where we've got some flowers growing. So we can have alternative ways of reaching nature.
So you can bring nature into your daily busy professional life in many small ways, which can still show some of those benefits that you were talking about.
Yeah, and think if you're lucky enough to be in a lovely office, whether that's at home or in a corporate office, they do add greenery, they add plants, they may add fish tanks and water and natural sounds, and there's proper reason behind them doing that.
And I suppose the screensavers you use, or the desktop background you have on your computer, will also be potential places for natural imagery to be displayed, which you can see out of the corner of your eye throughout your working day, which I suppose is also something that means I should change the display on my computers. I'm sitting here with 3 monitors, and all of which have kind of got corporate backgrounds. If I switch that for a mountain view or a forest vista, that'll probably help me. Okay, so that's how we can bring nature into our daily professional lives. Very easy. Use technology. You've actually reminded me of another question I have. It's, very similar to the tech question. Perhaps this is more of also a similarly blokey question. My wife often tells me that I don't need to give people advice. I don't need to tell people what I think they should do if they've shared an issue with me or they're talking about a challenge they're facing. Now, from my perspective as a helpful kind of guy, I give advice. I tell people what I think they should do because I'm just trying to help. But I'm starting to learn that doesn't always end up actually helping the other person. So my question to you is pretty simply, how could a person like me, middle of a busy day or a fast-moving situation, how can I be made or help to be more aware of and sensitive to what my friends or my colleagues are really going through?
So, Kyle, your wife is right.
First, I kind of knew that.
Yeah. We don't give advice. Again, going back to fMRI scans of the brain, if somebody is getting unsolicited advice, their amygdala is going to be activated, and that's your fight and flight, and that's not what we want. Even if they're given solicited advice, in fact, their prefrontal cortex is not doing the work. The person giving the advice is still the only one doing the work. So what we do is we ask questions. So we have to ask exploratory, open, quality questions to get the other person to open up, to say how they're feeling. And we can't, if we were to give advice, it means we're assuming we understand, and we actually don't until we've listened and asked questions. There is a wonderful mental health first aid acronym that people can follow, which is really useful. And it's ALGE, ALGEE. And the first A stands for approach the person that you're concerned about, obviously in private, assess and assist. The second is listen. Just listen. And in order to listen and communicate non-judgmentally, you would need to be asking questions, showing curiosity, doing a lot of listening, a lot of head nodding, showing empathy. And then we give support. Notice I say support, Kyle, not advice. Give support and information.
I am listening and nodding my head, Katie.
Great. So that's the G, give support and information. So that could be information about the department at work where there are people who can help when people are struggling with mental health issues. It could be support to help them find the telephone number or the website that they could visit, helping them get to the next step once they've identified what that next step could be. And then the double E are both encourage verbs. So the first one is to encourage the person to get appropriate professional help. First port of call, of course, would be your doctor. Ask them, Have they contacted their doctor? Or have they been on the website to look for what mental health support bodies are out there? And then the second encourage is other supports. So there are all sorts of things that can help people that are available. These are more maybe societal things, whether those are websites that help you, where there are podcasts like this or webinars that people can watch. They can get creative. They could indulge in art or writing or music. Journaling is very scientifically evidenced as a positive thing to do when you're feeling down. Meditation, there are wonderful apps that are free of charge, like headspace.com. They can read a good novel. And of course, everything else that we all know, diet, exercise, talking. Number one, top of that list should be talking.
Just to go through that again. So you said this was a component of a first aid course. Is that where this LG acronym is used? Is that what you said?
That's right. So mental health first aid, there are courses available online. And it's something that in every office, somebody should be qualified in, just as we've had physical first aid, medical first aid. But this is specifically for mental health. And that algae is their response strategy.
Good. So A for approach, L for listen, G for give support, and then the two E's both stand for encourage. And I suppose that makes good sense because we could always do with much more encouragement. That's something that organizations can do. So let's look at organizations. Let's look at their leaders and their management. Teams these days, during this tremendously disrupted period, are almost all working in a distributed fashion. They're almost all working remotely. So how has the pandemic changed the way that leaders and managers can help and support their wider teams? And how do they do that when they're not actually with those teams in the office?
First of all, I would say number one is to normalize conversations around emotions, mental health, and that starts with them. So when they're doing broadcasts or having meetings, they should be showing vulnerability themselves. They should be telling the story of how the pandemic's affected them and being very aware and empathic with what everybody's going through. And remember, I said everybody's been affected by this, but in different ways. But in order to get people to talk, which is the healthiest way to deal with mental health, the leaders have to show the way. They have to be the models of that behavior. So talking about their own struggles and how they've coped can help others do the same.
I've got a question about the use of that word vulnerability, because I sometimes think that doesn't sit very well with people who are in positions of leadership who are not comfortable with being seen as vulnerable. So would you say that perhaps the word humanity is just as good a word to use? Show humanity. That's a good start.
Yeah. And I like to talk about leaders making their organizations more humane, and it starts with them. It has become more of a buzzword, interestingly, in recent times. And again, it's Brené Brown that's brought it to the fore. And it takes courage to be vulnerable. So actually, we've traditionally think of vulnerability as being weakness. But if we're to show up authentically, we have to show vulnerability. So it does take courage. And the other things that, of course, we know is that we have to lead with compassion. We have to practice self-care as well. The oxygen mask analogy, put it on yourself first in order to be resourced to help others.
This is the aeroplane oxygen mask you talk about. They will always say that make sure you wear the mask first so that you are then in a better position to be able to help everyone else around you.
Exactly that. And we have to acknowledge uncertainty. You know, we were talking about human beings as we don't enjoy uncertainty. It makes us nervous. But as leaders, we have to acknowledge that uncertainty, the unpredictability, that agile nature of corporate life as it is in this day and age, because again, that helps others understand that if they're feeling uncertain, that is the way it is. So we have to acknowledge, what do we know? What don't we know? And where's the gap? And what can we do about it? And of course, a sense of we're in this together. So Everybody should feel that camaraderie of their colleagues, of the support mechanisms at work. So those are just some of the things that as leaders we can do. And of course, really importantly, is as a leader, your job is to inspire others. And that means giving them a sense of hope in the future and what that may hold.
Yes. And we'll put those 10 tips, the how-to for leaders, in the show notes for this episode. And as you said right at the end, it really is all about remembering that it's okay to prioritize ourselves. We do that in aeroplanes when the oxygen mask comes down, the oxygen mask analogy you use. It starts with self-care. And be okay with doing that. There's nothing wrong with starting with yourself because it's not ending there. That's where it starts. Give us some tips on how we as individuals can actually remember to prioritize ourselves and be okay with doing that.
It's about creating rituals. So just as we have our morning ritual, getting dressed and getting out of the house in normal times for work, we need well-being rituals. And if we could create 1 hour a day, not just for exercise, but that could include being in nature. It could include meditation. It might include just sitting, thinking through, so showing some self-compassion and being grateful for how you yourself coped with your day. Reflecting like that has also shown to have great benefits for well-being. So it could also be journaling, meditating, whatever it is that just helps you be in a better place. And of course, really importantly, it might be picking up the phone to a friend and having a chat for half an hour.
And what else would you say that people in these situations would be able to do? Because you've talked about getting out in nature, connecting with other groups. There are apps, there's online, but also doing simple things when out and about. Greet people, reconnect with people.
Absolutely. I've even seen neighbours on my walk, two elderly ladies who live next door to each other. They were sitting on opposite sides of their garden fence, having a cup of tea together in a chat. We find ways, don't we? There are so many community groups as well, whether that's your local choir, of course, all gone virtual, but still available, art groups online, Amblers associations, or Join in Action for Happiness, what's called the 10 Keys for Happier Living. Those are in every locality in the US and in the UK.
What other resources would you recommend for anyone wanting to explore this more deeply? Let's say you might not feel you need it, but you're certainly interested. Where would you suggest that anyone wanting to explore this more deeply should look?
So in general, there are so many different websites and courses available. I know so many people that have done online learning. In fact, we did survey. Most people say that they've embarked in some kind of learning online. But if you want something for your team at work or your organization, iOpener can also help with that. We do have a well-being and care package. You can sign up for those individually, which you could choose from a range of topics that you can work on one-to-one with your dedicated facilitator and coach, or you can do those as a team. And I think especially with teams regrouping now that we're coming out of the pandemic, what's really important is that they have those conversations about what have they learnt, how have they shifted in their thinking and their ways of doing things now that we're coming out? And we've got a session that people can ask us about called Reforming and Performing as a Team Post-Pandemic. And another one people may be interested in is growing organisational resilience and well-being. So these are sessions that can be customised to each team.
Super. And we'll put links to the iOpener website in the show notes to this episode. Now, what about someone who wants to connect with you, Katie? Find out more about the work you do with iOpener online or in real life? Where would they look for you?
Well, my email is Katie, Katie.Demain, Demain, at iopener.com. That's IOPENER.com.
And that's the letter I, not the EYE-I that most of us have two of on the front of our face.
If any of those sessions are of interest, they can go to our website, which is iOpener Institute. So IOPENER Institute.com. That's where they'll find us.
All right. And what about stuff that's happening in real life? Are you doing anything interesting over the course of the next few months that you'd like to put on people's radar?
We are offering a coaching accreditation program. So many people out there may be interested in becoming a professional coach themselves, and we're signing people up. The next one begins at the beginning of June. So we're in the last week here, and it gives them a professional coaching accreditation, and that is offered virtually. So I think that some of these things have become even easier to do now that everything's gone virtual. They don't have to spend a week in New York to get that qualification or whatever it may have been previously.
All right. Now, as we wrap up, we ask all our guests to imagine their own virtual Go Beyond Disruption podcast T-shirt. So, Katie Demain, if you were to print one sentence on the front of this imaginary Go Beyond Disruption podcast T-shirt, one sentence that delivered a simple message for a listener to take away from your conversation today, what would it say on the front of that T-shirt?
Right. Well, I think I'm going to break the rules. I need 2 sentences, Kyle. It would say, you talk, I'll listen.
Okay. You talk, I'll listen. That makes perfect sense. Thank you very much. And we'll have to leave it there. My guest joining us from the north of England, close to the shadow of Hadrian's Wall, the Director of Leadership Development Programs and global partner at iOpener Institute, that is executive coach Katie Demain. Show notes will have links to all the resources Katie's talked about and a quick listener notes. You can view those show notes really easily. Just click on the episode's info icon in the podcast app on your smartphone or tablet, or you can open the episode in your computer's web browser and you'll find everything right there. 2 other websites we'd recommend as well, of course, the mentalhealth.org.uk website. That is the homepage of the Mental Health Awareness Week 2021. So that's mentalhealth.org.uk. And while we get a National Mental Health Awareness Week here in the UK, in the US, all of this month, all of May, is National Mental Health Awareness Month. Runs all the way from the 1st through until Monday, the 31st of May 2021. And you can find out more on the website at NAMI.org. That's NAMI.org, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI.org. And of course, the ARCPA and CIMA have dedicated online coronavirus resources, and you can find links to those in the show notes too. And you can find much more on this and other topics, turning disruption into opportunity using what we've talked about today, as well as all sorts of other things that we've talked about on other weekly podcasts here on gobeyonddisruption.com. You can visit the portal at future.arcpa.org. That is future.arcpa.org for courses, webinars, and other professional development resources. A very useful mix of free and paid-for resources, so do have a browse. Thanks again to our guest, Katie Demain of iOpener Institute, and of course, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, go tell someone about it, share it, or tell us what you thought. We'd love to know your opinion, and you can get hold of us by making a comment at the website or by emailing us via the feedback link in the show notes. From the ARCPA and CIMA office in the heart of the City of London, I'm Kyle Hannon. We'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time, keep listening and keep safe. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at aicpa-cima.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.